we've collaborated before. We collaborated back in 2008. We were both invited by Milton Fredley. He's an art professor at Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania. He had a project called the Handprint Identity Project. And so he put together 10 poets with 10 painters. So this sort of pairing. And I was paired with Kebedech because I was that's the artist that I liked and I knew her work. So that was the first collaboration. I would say that because we were both at Howard University, we were in the same space. I remember my introduction to her was through a newspaper profile of her in the Washington Post. So I sort of knew her through the media, and then when I went across campus, I actually got to meet her. And I think over the years we've had mutual friends. Some of her people in her department that when she was at Howard that were my friends, and so I felt just me hanging out over there with the artists will open the door to collaboration.
Yeah. Kebedech, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and this time I proposed. As Ethelbert said, we worked together before, and I noticed the way he works, the way he thinks, his thoroughness in everything, not only thinking about the project conceptually, but also how it was going to come together was very important to me because he complemented actually what I miss usually. So I am usually passionate. I work very hard, but passionately. But this designed plan to achieve a goal was actually his thing. So in addition to that, of course, ideas matter. And he's a fine poet dedicated to humanity, which was very appealing to me. So this time it was me who proposed.
So you came up with the name for the collaboration, Blue and the Gray?
Actually, a part of, you see, it is hyphenated, this era of exile. Ethelbert suggested this era of exile to be part of the, title, and that was taken from one of my poems. So that was his creative idea, which, of course, I loved it so much. And the colors aspect is mine because conceptually, I was thinking in terms of using those colors metaphorically. So it's a combination of both ideas.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, David, that especially to your students, that we're sitting here talking when issues of migration, refugees, these are the major issues that you're going to be confronted with this century. And so we're talking about political and cultural displacement. I also think about exile in terms of, spiritual exile, where we're exiled somewhat from our soul. So that's another way. But at the same time, we have this era of exile that if your students were to walk around Washington, D.C., you also see a sense of homelessness, which I'm looking at in terms of exile, people away from their home. You have people here who have been evicted from their homes. I think one of the major issues affecting us as a society is the Palestinian question, which deals with the issue of home. Israel deals with the issue of home in terms of Jews. And so this topic, I think, should resonate to many, many people, immigrants from whatever country, but being clear that when we deal with exile, sometimes we're dealing with migrants and sometimes we're dealing with refugees. Some people, are migrating because, they're looking for work and a way to feed their family back home. Some people are migrating because of wars and gangs and drugs. And so we have to make sure that we have that distinction. But then at the same time, our hearts have to be a home for others so that we can be welcoming.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And something interesting happened to me as I was writing about this project. I've begun to put my thoughts together in an essay about your collaboration. And at one point, I mistyped and I wrote this era of exiles instead of this era of exile. And then when I took that S off, I realized, well, that's something too, that exile is a state of mind, that exiles would say that, oh, those folks out there are exiles. But this era of exile is like the exile that we're all experiencing, and you say spiritually, and some of us in a more direct and profound way than others, but it's something that connects the human spirit as a state of being, as much as it is, a political situation that one might find oneself in.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you have blue and gray. Kebedech, you wrote in one of your statements about the work that blue and blues it was an issue of translation for you. Is there anything that you recollect from that you could share with us?
Yes, that happened when I tried to translate Ethelbert's poem, The Blue Years, and conceptually it references a state of mind, which is not, of course, uplifting, but it also has a historic reference to the African-American culture in terms of transforming the experience that they had to go through music and relevant art forms. So that concept of blue is very obvious on that regard, which we don't have, in Amharic language. So maybe the equivalent word, that parallels essence-wise the concept of blueness might be black. So I was conflicted for a while which way to go. Would it be okay to translate in terms of what could be understood by Ethiopians, feeling-wise, or was it also a choice actually to introduce this term to the Ethiopian readers? So I remember talking about it, with Ethelbert, and I asked him, would it be okay to change the word from blue and black to black? So he immediately said, no, it wouldn't be American. So it was a
Beauty
good
of collaboration.
Yes, yes.
There's always pushback.
Yes, so it was a very good stretch, and now it even helped me to coin a term that was not, very usual in the context of, Amharic language. Yeah, so it was a good thing that we're doing this.
Lovely. Ethelbert, anything about that on your end?
Well, no. When I was developing as a writer, late 60s, early 70s, there was a real debate and discussion around the Black aesthetic. What makes a poem Black? What is Blackness? And then what happens is that many of us who were looking at this theoretically began to say, okay, what's unique about, that's African American? And we stumbled upon the fact that it was the blues. That if there's one thing that is the essence of African American, it's blues. And the blues has a structure, so you can pretty much teach it. But, it's also a sense in terms of understanding the blues in terms of it's not just sorrow, but there's a certain resiliency that's there. This is actually the 60th year, I believe, of Amir Baraka's key book, Blues People.
Yeah.
And he talks about how when that first African was in the fields, began to look up and realize he was not going back to Africa. That's where the blues began, in terms of saying, okay, how do I make sense out of this, way out of nowhere. And so what happens is that this sense of Blackness is really in terms of connected to the blues. And when you look at African-American music, if you're looking at jazz or whatever, the essence of it is the blues. And so what we try to do is move it from music into the visual art, because it's there in the literature. You read Ellison and other writers, the blues is key. Langston, Sterling Brown. But I think that this collaboration is a way of saying, okay, I hear the blues and now I can go in and see it.
I can see the blues. Wow. Resilience, you just use the word resilience, and that's the word that I feel as well. Is there a tone of resilience, Kebedech, in your work that you recognize yourself with these curling figures, or and I haven't shown this to the group yet, but I will, the life jacket piece, which is so incredible to me.
Yes, I would say yes, and it is embedded in the aesthetics itself. So to imagine something beautiful out of the tragedy, around us, there must be a sense of, resiliency, in it. Otherwise, it wouldn't come to be beautiful. So I always associate both the process and the intent of making art is actually to be able to deal with beauty. So there is a dilemma to it, of course. How do you balance, the tragedy and the beauty that one anticipates to put together? So just to come back to your question, yes. Otherwise, I mean, we wouldn't have been talking about anything, even historically and, currently with all the tragedy around us. It is the sense of resiliency that's, helping us to survive it.
You went from realism to abstract to non-objective work over your career. Was that a deliberate evolution based on where you were in the world, or was that something that came organically out of just making new work?
I came with the tradition of realism, and I was working well, on that realm. And the first series of my undergraduate, the upper graduate courses were actually in the manner of Impressionism, and I was comfortable with it. However, the subject matter that I was dealing with required something different beyond, realism. So realism gave me a chance to be able to narrate a story, but that narration was a little bit constrained, to me, because if you want to talk about humanity and that humanity is going to touch global issues beyond one's experience or immediate observation, then the kind of narrative that works for specific is not going to be applicable to more. So that was one of the reasons that I moved, or there was an urge to depart from realism initially. In addition to that, again, when I narrate, most of the imagery that come to mind were things that I witnessed, I heard, I researched, again, focusing on the outside. But how do you define abstract ideas, for instance, like degradation, like pain, like anguish, etc.? So those abstract notions actually led me towards finding, a different venue.
Yeah. Wow, what a beautiful answer. The future unfolding, one of my favorite pieces. That's it. And how do you create out of metal the depiction of the future unfolding? And part of it's curling backwards and part of it's unfolding in front of you. It's incredible. Does anybody have a question for these two about what collaboration might bring to their work, or Abby?
I was wondering if
I'll repeat the question, Gil.
I was wondering if there were any difficulties in, I guess, like bridging the gap or merging the physicality of sculpture with the abstract nature of poetry.
Were there difficulties bridging the gap between the physicality of sculpture and the abstract nature of the words, poetry?
Mm. The words and the yes, it was a challenge, and I needed that challenge, and I called for it actually, because we have to move beyond our comfort zone to create something different, and there is going to be hope in it. That hope is going to be, I'm going to embark to this new thing and I'm going to succeed. So it's required, a great deal of revising, reworking on things, and above all, finding the right kind of material. So what was I thinking when I wanted to deal with poetry and also with the visual work? Were I going to incorporate those words as if the format is a poster? That was something that I needed to think deeply, and also was I going to use those words to be meaningful? Meaning, and what would be the purpose of writing them meaningfully, incorporating them in the arts, while the words themselves are capable of standing by themselves. So the merging of those two was going to create something that is evolving, currently. So among other things, beyond the conceptual, to translate that concept that one has in mind, process is going to be the primary thing. So I explored new materials, new technique. So when you understand me, when I say new technique, this is a technique that the artist herself has to create and master, which depends again on the length of time and practice. So it took a long time. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Kebedech. What about for you?
In terms of what? In terms of how I operate?
Well, I think what Kebedech did was answer the last question I had for you two, which was, how did this project push against your safe places as a poet or as a sculptor and force you to open up into new ways of writing or thinking about?
Well, as an artist, you want to take risks. Kebedech was talking about that comfort level. The comfort level means that you play what people ask you to play. I remember George Benson saying, like, if you want me to play jazz, pay me. But what happens is that for the true artist, it's always this exploration. This is why travel is so important to artists. Seeing things. It's always very important in terms of looking at the relationship between the visual arts and poetry. We know, for example, that when we say, okay, what is a stanza? We know that a stanza is actually another word for room. Okay, we know that, for example, if we walk into a gallery, we're walking into a room. Okay, so we can ask ourselves, what would we do in a room in a poem, and what would we do in a room if we were in a gallery? Well, the thing that we want to make sure is that we feel comfortable. We move around the room. We look at art from a different perspective. We look at words in terms of how they make up, the stanza. But then we also want to make sure that we're not, missing things that are in the dark corner. The dark corner might be where there's a surprise or where there's a mystery. In a stanza, that might be a word that just stands out, that when you say it aloud, that makes the whole thing. Why is that word there? Because it sounds, that it should be there. And it lights up that little dark space that's in the corner. But if you're a visual artist, especially in terms of abstract, you have to like stand around and look at it from different things. And that movement, hopefully in terms of if you're a writer of poetry, that might be that movement where it's alliteration. It might be that movement because you're, musically inspired by jazz or something like that. But, this is where you look at abstract artists like Jackson Pollock. They're playing like little Miles Davis in the back while they're throwing the paint on the ground. But there's a connection between that motion of their hands and the motion of what they're hearing. And so I think that for me, and this is why it's important, I think, at this time, to collaborate with a visual artist. Where in the past, many of my collaborations were with, African American musicians. Okay, and I remember the writer Ishmael Reed was sort of saying, okay, why do we always emphasize African American music when we talk about African American literature? What happens if I stand in front of a Romare Bearden painting or Jacob Lawrence? What's happening? I know that somebody's playing the bongos behind me, or a saxophone. But what happens if I'm standing in front of this painting? There's definitely something going on, and now it's up for the critic to say, okay, let me make sense of this. Okay, what is the connection between this Jacob Lawrence print behind somebody who's reciting a poem? Okay. And this is where I think the collaboration is good for us as artists, and it's good for us in terms of those of us who are coming into a gallery on whatever experience they're having and say, okay, this piece of work speaks to me. Okay, getting back to the beginning of this discussion about exile, that somebody will walk in there, maybe they're separated from their home, maybe they just lost a parent or someone, but they will feel a sense of the theme. They may read a line of one of our poems, and then what happens? There's going to be things in there which you're going to say, okay, I don't understand this because it's in another language. I'm Ethiopian and this is in English, but what happens? The art might translate it for me. So I go from the wall with a poem and I look at the painting and I go back. This is just why, you can't approach art like it's carry out, give me a, Mickey D's, give me a man and I go, I'm saying, you don't even want to heat that up afterward, but what happens, you want to have that experience. And I think, for me, just, being here with both of you is a wonderful experience in terms of I grow as an artist because of both of you interacting with you.
Yeah, agreed for me too. I really I'm honored to be a part of it just as an observer on the outside, but I do feel what you said is the essence of this project, which is that one other part is always translating its partner in some way that the partner can't do for themselves. The poetry is translating for the art in a way that the art can't do unto itself without words, and vice versa. And I know that experience of the state of exile that we all have encountered or embodied in some way will be held in that room in June when this opens. So I'm really so happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks. Can we give him a hand?
Okay.